Hi, I'm Ken Goldstein, Professor of Political Science at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and welcome to Office Hours Online. We're going to do a little bit something different today. It is a one-year anniversary of Barack Obama winning the presidency, and I've invited three Office Hours veterans, John Pevehouse, my colleague from the Department of Political Science, Charles Franklin, also my colleague from the Department of Political Science, and Morris Davis from the Wisconsin School of Business. And what we're going to do today is go through 8, 9, 10 topics, as many as we can go through. I'm going to let each of my guests speak for about 90 seconds. We got a little bell here to make the professors be quiet, because it's always difficult to make professors be quiet, and try and give you a quick, excellent rundown of Barack Obama's first year. So Charles, let me start with you. Barack Obama campaigned that he was going to change the tone of politics in Washington. What's gone on in terms of Barack Obama changing the tone of politics in Washington?
Well, the tone's changed, but it's gotten more negative, if anything. I think the administration, legitimately came in trying to win over some Republican support, especially for controversial things. But they discovered that the trouble here is it's not just a twosome that they're worrying about. They've got the House and the Senate, and they've got Democratic and Republican parties in both of those. So it's really four partners you have to engage in this bipartisanship. The president found first that Republicans weren't in any mood to give him much help for a lot of his initiatives, but he also discovered that the Democrats in the House and Senate were so giddy with power, having come back in with a Democratic president at last, that they were very unwilling to give much to the Republicans. And so you had a perfect storm here of Republicans with every incentive not to help the president out, and Democrats in the Congress making it easy for Republicans to differentiate themselves. And finally, a president who, after a good deal of at least rhetorical offers, found very little coming back, and sometime early midsummer decided to wash his hands of most of the bipartisanship and move ahead with a more partisan agenda.
You made it a little bit under the bell, but there's no rollover minutes on this show, but you still get the second question. We just had 2009 elections. We had a win for the Republican in New Jersey, win for the Republican in Virginia, and a win for the Democrat in the New York 23rd congressional races. The Virginia and New Jersey were gubernatorial races. Any lessons to be learned from those political contests?
I think a couple. The Republicans that won in New Jersey and Virginia both emphasized economic issues and downplayed social issues. This is a very interesting development in a Republican Party that has often shifted to the right by emphasizing social issues, but now is shifting to the right on economic issues, and is finding electoral success by going over against incumbent Democratic administrations in both states who have faced difficult economic times, raised taxes in New Jersey, and so on. You also saw in New York 23, that special election in upstate New York, a Democrat win for the first time since General Grant was president after the Civil War. And there you saw the fratricide within the Republican Party of conservatives breaking away and so savaging the moderate or liberal Republican nominee that she eventually dropped out of the race. At the weekend, Republicans and conservatives were very giddy about their chances of winning that New York seat. It didn't happen. And the lesson there is a divided party often collapses. The last thing is who didn't show up. Barack Obama won Virginia in 2008 by 6 percentage points. Based on the exit polls from this election, he would have lost it by 8.
Perfect. Now, we turn to our office hours economist, Morris Davis. Reports about the effect, the impact of the stimulus package. Joe Biden was out last week making claims about the number of jobs created by the stimulus package. Obviously, the economy was in very tough shape when the stimulus package was passed. Can we assess its impact? Can we assess its effectiveness? Can we assess whether it worked or not? Can we assess whether we got a lot of bang for a very big buck?
There's always going to be a debate among economists about whether or not a stimulus can do anything. And this comes down to whether or not the federal government can actually take steps to manipulate for the good of the country economic outcomes. So the best case that you can make for a stimulus package is that it temporarily put to employment about 750,000 people at a cost of somewhere between $100 billion and $150 billion spent. What does that mean for practical purposes? It means $100,000 or so for every job that's been temporarily created. So then you could ask, is it really worth $100,000 per job temporarily created? And I emphasize the word temporary. These people will eventually find employment in the labor markets as unemployment rates fall. So it might take 3 years for unemployment rates to fall from 10% to 5%, but when they do fall, the people that are currently employed by the government would then be employed at a lower unemployment rate. So we are talking about the temporary saving of about 750,000 jobs at a cost of $100,000 per job. The question is, would you define that as successful? I do not.
And we will immediately zip right over to auto policy. Auto policy, not part of the stimulus package, but the auto companies in Detroit in big trouble, the Obama administration coming in, bailing out the auto companies, and also passing cash for clunkers. Assess that.
So Obama comes in and promises to change the way that Washington does business. To me, this looks like exactly the way that Washington always did business. You could ask, what did the bailout of GM and Chrysler do? Nothing. They both eventually went bankrupt. The only thing it did was it shifted the loss in bankruptcy from bondholders to the UAW. So who were the winners from the government and from Obama's administration? The UAW, one of his biggest supporters. So I would argue that not only was cash for clunkers bad economic policy, it was politics as usual. If people want to be upset at the way that the administration's handled itself, they've basically reneged on a promise to change the way that we do business in Washington by directly rewarding constituents through a market intervention.
We can get to Charles about health care policy. Bring us up to date. What's going on there? What do we think is going to happen? Are they going to get a health care bill in this next year?
Well, it depends on whether you're counting this calendar year or next year or what. I think in the mainstream is that over the summer, health care seemed to really stall out. In the fall, it's moved substantially forward in both the Senate and now in the House. So you're reaching the point where there are actually bills on the table to be negotiated and voted on and then brought to conference committee to negotiate the differences between House and Senate bills. But, you know, the administration was wildly naive to think they could have gotten this through as early as August, which was their original deadline. They'll be very lucky to get it finished this calendar year. Now we're hearing talk about letting it slip into the State of the Union or next spring. The trouble is you'll be going into an election year. It's going to get harder and harder to pass. I think they're in a lot of trouble. One of the problems is health care is an intrinsically really hard issue. And Democrats have tended to go into it thinking that they would easily find a solution to this. They're finding how difficult that is, even within their own party, to get complete agreement and certainly to win any Republican votes. So this is going to be difficult. They may very well pass something eventually, but it's not going to come easy and it's not going to come real soon.
Yes or no? Smart or dumb to let Congress take the absolute lead on health care policy?
Probably necessary. When the Clinton administration tried to write it at the White House, they ran into an enormous amount of trouble. When they got it to Congress, I think Congress will have its say in these things anyway, but it's meant that the Obama health care reform really hasn't been coming from him. He's had to be responsible for stuff that he doesn't have control over.
Great. Now I'm going to turn back to Morris, who's not been giving Obama such great grades so far. Talk to me about a Wall Street reform package. Obviously, some of the things that Wall Street did got us into this economic recession, and Obama came in talking about some pretty serious reforms on how Wall Street does business so this doesn't happen again. What's gone on there?
Well, it's obvious that we need to reform Wall Street. Why? Because we've learned that Wall Street takes big bets. If the bet comes out positive, they keep all the gains. If the bet comes out negative and you're big enough, then the government bails you out. So it's obvious that there's an incentive problem in Wall Street, and Obama's done the right thing in saying we need to reform the incentive structure so that these kinds of asymmetric wins and losses don't occur. The proposals that are on the table are absurd. There's this idea that we're going to identify and regulate systemic risk. First of all, nobody can identify even define what systemic risk is. Second of all, we've learned that we can't regulate business, and I point to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Those were two businesses that were regulated by the federal government. That Fannie and Freddie donated so much to politicians that they basically captured their regulator. And they basically worked on behalf of Congress to do whatever Congress wanted, and then when the time came, they failed. So here were two big companies that were already regulated, and they failed. So the thought is, I guess that was viewed as such a great success that we're going to repeat the enterprise.
Okay. John, Pevehouse has sat here very patiently as we've talked about lots of domestic economic and domestic political policies and issues. Let's turn overseas. And obviously the big decision that the Obama administration is facing is, what are they going to do in Afghanistan? Are they going to double down, keep the strategy as it is, or significantly change the strategy? Bring us quickly up to date on that and how you think they're doing.
Okay. So obviously this came to a head in August when McChrystal's report leaks that says, look, we're not doing so well in Afghanistan. We need to double down. We need to add 40 to 60,000 more troops. McChrystal was immediately called out by Obama and his advisors for sort of circumventing the chain of command and saying, you're making this a public debate. This should have been an internal debate. We are having trouble in Afghanistan. The Taliban's back. We've got a corrupt government in power. The elections happen. It's estimated that up to a third of Karzai's votes in the first round of the election were fraudulent in some way. So, you know, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? I mean, on one hand, they can double down and do exactly what McChrystal says, but they're potentially throwing good money after bad, supporting this regime, which people in Afghanistan don't particularly like. We know these guys are in bed with the drug dealers. They're in bed with sort of the bad forces that they're supposed to be fighting. The flip side is, you know, if we abandon them, the Taliban's going to come back, you know, a la the Biden plan, and we sort of stay back a little bit. The Taliban comes back. With the Taliban likely comes al-Qaeda. Afghanistan becomes another bed of insecurity. So they're laying back. They're waiting to see what happens with Karzai. A lot of pressure on Karzai right now. My read is he's been handed a list of maybe up to 100 people saying, get these guys arrested, get them out of here, or we're going to cut bait at some point.
Okay. Let's move to Iraq now. Barack Obama campaigned, Afghanistan was the good war, Iraq was the bad war. He was going to accelerate our departure from Iraq. Seems to me we're doing in Iraq what we would have done in Iraq in any case with Obama, and it seems to be going fairly well in comparative terms.
Yeah, moderately well. I mean, look, this debate we had in the 2008 campaign about Iraq was sort of irrelevant, given that the status of forces agreement had been finalized before the November election even happened. McCain and Obama had either one would have had their hands tied. Obama promised to accelerate. He's tried. There are literally logistical difficulties of getting tens of thousands of people out of Iraq. Odierno says he can speed that up. Odierno would like to wait until the next round of elections in Iraq. There's been some bickering amongst the parties. They can't quite get their act together to figure out what the pattern of the elections are going to look like, what the rules are going to be. Once that gets set, if the next elections go okay, I would view us as sort of accelerating the pullout out of there. Now, whether those folks go to Iraq, whether those folks come home, I think that's still a bit of an open question.
Barack Obama, like many American presidents before him, wading into the Arab-Israeli conflict, right, gives a fairly well-received speech in Congress, in Cairo, challenges the Arab world, very directly also challenges the Israeli government on settlements and other issues. Right. Is this going to be just another president who gets bogged down in the Israeli-Palestinian mire? If they're not ready for it, there's nothing we can do?
Probably, although I do think I think he went in a little bit naive. I think he's quickly dropped some of that naivete. I mean, he appointed the right people, right? I mean, he appoints George Mitchell, he appoints some good folks. He makes some demands. Netanyahu pushes back, he caves in. He makes some demands of the Palestinians, they push back, he caves in a bit. There's give and take, you know, as you point out, everyone since Carter, Nixon has tried this, they've all failed. At least he didn't wait until the last 6 months to try to get his Nobel Prize. Right, he already got it, and so he doesn't need to wait now. So he's jumped ahead. He's done this. Will anything come of this? Yeah, hard to say. I think now the eyes are open. I think there may be some progress, but I think the reality of it is he's going to face an uphill battle, like every president has and will in the future.
Excellent. So, John, thanks for giving us an update on foreign policy. Charles on domestic and politics. Morris on the economy. I'll play the seminar leader and sum it up. It seems like Obama's getting a B or a C from our experts here, but I think as you'd all agree, if we're back here speaking in another year, if he gets health care through, if they make a decision on Afghanistan, if Iraq continues to go well, if the economy turns up, he'll be in much better shape going into 2010, 2012. Doesn't get health care, if Afghanistan continues to get worse, if we have the economy not going back, it's going to be a worse grade. So, everyone, thanks for dropping by on our special Office Hours Online as we try to do something a little bit different today and go around the horn. So please join us again next time, either on the Big Ten Network or Office Hours Online.